podcast coordinator for Crave the Sound. We're starting off the new year with Reilly McClain and Zac Clement interviewing local Colorado musician Margot Sease of the Beeves. Margot talks with them about the band's slightly disorganized music process, playing live show, and together they delve into the band's upcoming album. Enjoy!
Do you want to do like a little intro, maybe be like...
Well, I do have like one question to start us off that I think is like pretty
like before
important.
We say...
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So you have an AOL email address.
Yes, I do.
Can you speak to that?
That's so funny. No, I've always had an AOL email address. My dad set it up for me when I was like 6 years old.
Okay.
He did the same thing with my two sisters, and like my whole family had AOL. And I have just like literally kept it through the years because it's the thing I feel the most comfortable with. And also because everybody else diverged from AOL and went on to other emails. AOL is just like totally ad-free. It's consistent. You get on there. It's just a good email address. So I've always kept it.
Is this an AOL ad? You convinced me. I might
AOL
change.
sponsor us, please.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
That would be nice. But yeah, do you want to do an intro?
This is Crave the Podcast. I'm Zac.
I'm Lily.
And here we are with Margot from the Beeves.
Today,
You want to kick it off?
yeah, we're just going to be talking through a little bit of the band's history. We're going to be going through a particular track and a little bit of a music video, which is very exciting. So, Margot, we've heard some conflicting stories about where the Beeves comes from. And we want the truth. We want it once and for all. Is it the Bible? Is it middle school volleyball? Is it purple zebras? What is it?
Oh my gosh. Well, so you're not going to get the truth right here because my truth is different than Ian's truth. And I think that Will doesn't care. And so my understanding of it is that there are two parts of that are actually true. We had a volleyball match like that day, and Ian and I needed a name for it. And at that point, we were going by the Purple Zebras / the Sunkissed Nips, which just wasn't doing it anymore, because we were getting older, 6th grade. And so we were like, okay, well, what are we going to do? And my impression is that we went upstairs and we grabbed my mom's like enormous dictionary off the shelf, and we just plopped it open, and like that was the word, because I have absolutely no idea where else we would have gotten it, because at that point I know Ian was not actively reading the Bible, nor does he actively read the Bible to begin with, so I don't think that it came from the Bible. I think that he probably looked up the Beeves one time and found a Bible verse and was like, this is how it came to be. But he's really under the impression that that's where it came from, and so maybe it is, because maybe I'm not quite, I don't know. So I that's my impression. So we used the Beeves for our volleyball team. And I remember that we were dressed up as like 1980s, like kind of flamboyant volleyball players with our big beards. And it was the first time it was ever used. And we just kind of stuck with it from then on. So that's my understanding of it. And I don't think I ever like expected to keep the name, nor did I expect to still be playing this many years later. I think that's kind of where the name has come from.
I mean, we'll believe you, so sounds good. So, I mean, going back a little bit, since that was 6th grade when the name came about, do you want to...
Actually, I think that was 8th grade. I think that was 8th grade, because we started in 6th grade, and then it was the Beeves in 8th grade.
Okay.
So
you guys started in 6th grade. Do you want to tell us a bit more about, like, the history of you guys as a band, the story of, like, the Beeves, and then how, I mean, you guys all got into music and decided to start a band back in 6th grade or whatever?
Crazy. We are going way back. I was just a child, and so is Ian. I mean, he and I met when we were in 6th grade, and just immediately it was like this chemical reaction, and we started playing just every single day together, because growing up in little small town Erie, there's not really a lot for us to do, and we kind of felt a little separated from everybody else just around us, and we were really the only two that were starting to get into music and everything. We were both terrible guitar players, but we were really passionate and excited about it, and we just started to play literally every day after school. Like, from like that moment on, it was like until like middle school was over, we were just playing all the time. And since then, I mean, we've just literally been playing. And after middle school was done, in the early years of high school, we'd had kind of a rotating drummer through those years, or Ian and I would switch off. I would drum, he'd play guitar, he would drum, I would play guitar, kind of thing. And then we had a couple drummers, and eventually we wanted to get out of, Erie and play other places. We had no idea how the fuck to book a show. And so we just started busking on Pearl Street because that was literally the only spot that we knew you could just play and people would be there. And so we corralled his younger brother, Will, who was like 14, I think, at the time, to come and just sit down and go like... and we started busking and just playing like 3 Against Me songs and like a really shitty rendition of Wagon Wheel for some reason, which I probably shouldn't admit. Yeah, and we just rotate we had like 2 originals at that point that we were kind of rotating in that set too, and just playing them 2 guitars, Will on the drums, just like with the bass drum and the snare, and we do it for hours and hours, like 6+ hours, like every single weekend. And it kind of like solidified. It was like, I guess this is kind of what we're doing. So it's kind of like the early beginning of where we all started out, before we were like, this is a band,
So since you started playing like live gigs and busking, do you think that there's like a different energy that you bring to live shows versus when you're recording?
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So with a live performance, for me, that's kind of, that's where I thrive, especially with this project. And I think that the way we are as a band is that it is really a focused live performance, and it's a live act. And when we first started recording, it was really scary because there was another band out of Nashville called Diarrhea Planet, if you guys have heard of them. They're amazing, actually, despite like the humorousness of the name. Like, they're actually a very like serious and awesome, like there's like 5 guitar players, and they're so awesome. But we had heard these stories of like how amazing their live performances were opposed to their recordings. And they kind of fell apart as a band because they could never actually capture that live performance in a sound recording. And so I think at the beginning we kind of were getting worried about that because we had really figured out how to play live, and that's what we felt comfortable doing. And for me, like, over the years, it's taken different, it means different things, but I think it's ultimately kind of had the same effect on me every time I play like a live performance. And I think Ian and I specifically, have always had that same ideology. And in my opinion, it's kind of like a half an hour to 45 minutes of like reinvention to kind of let your eyes roll back and to just kind of exist. And I know Ian feels the same way, and we've both kind of tried to channel that through the years. And with recording, it was really hard in the beginning because it's so technical, and trying not to get psyched out when there's so much going on was really difficult. So I think that, our first recordings were a lot of fun, but I think we were definitely in our heads. Like the first thing we did that never got released, and then our EP, which was a lot of fun too, but I definitely think that we weren't as we were still completely hands-on and everything, but I think that we were kind of just like, we didn't quite have it yet in the beginning.
Because your album just came out last year.
Yes.
How long did you guys spend recording that and trying to get it right? And did you spend a lot of time trying to be kind of perfectionist in getting what you felt in a live show come across on that recorded album? Or was it kind of more of just let's play this as if we're playing a live show, one take it and see how we like it kind of thing?
No, that's a good question. That album was recorded over the course of 7 days, the entirety of it. In a basement in Denver. So we had kind of a local idol of ours had reached out after we had really been playing in Denver for a few years. And this was after we'd released the EP, we started kind of playing, some of the larger places around and circulating those after kind of gritting our teeth. It went from Pearl Street to DIY spaces. So Seventh Circle was our home throughout the end of my high school career, and the Forge, which was in Boulder, and all these kind of DIY spots, and kind of building that base. and then kind of getting there. And so Nate from the Yoppers had kind of realized what we were doing through kind of strange happenstance, and was like, yeah, I just want to record you guys. Well, no, basically what happened is he reached out and we played a show with the Yoppers, and then he came up to Ian and I like after the show, and he was like, I just want to record you guys and let's just do this thing. He'd never recorded a band or like produced a band. You know, we'd never worked with like a big person before or anything. And he was like, yeah, I have a friend that can do it in the basement. His name is Tyler Imbrogno from another band called Eldrin. And we are not usually prepared ever. Ever. We like either wait until the last minute, or communication is just like kind of like falling downstairs. You know, you kind of walk up and then you fall down, and it's like never can quite just like make it to the top. But I think in that process, you know, we had kind of started to put some songs together and formulate, you know, these are 6 songs that we have. And we went into the studio with Nate and Tyler expecting that we had it like totally written. When we got down there, nothing. I mean, it was like truly just kind of like puzzle pieces. And so it was a week of, honestly, it was a week of enlightenment in a lot of different ways too, because it was like the first time that I think we'd actually like clicked in the recording sense, where we were in a safe space, we were in a basement. Like there was stuff riding on it, but it didn't feel like a bunch of gravity was on top of us. It was just like, we're going to record an album, and it was kind of magical for everybody in the room, because I don't think Nate expected anything like that, nor did Tyler, and nor did we. And so when the week was over and we were listening to it back, it was just like this whole montage of, you know, sit down from song 1 and then finish it. And that's kind of how it was written. It was like, you know, we'll play the first song on the track, finish that up, move on to the next one, where are we at, and just kind of layered it that way. And then the album was done. And that was a pretty successful one, which we were pretty happy with. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely say it's a good album.
Yeah, very much. And that's crazy to know it was all done in 7 days.
All in 7 days, everything you hear on that. But it took 2 years to release, so I think that's an important thing to note. Mm-hmm. We finished it, and in the same fashion, we still just like have never known what we're supposed to be doing. And we've always done it ourselves. Everything has always been done just like us, with not like very little outside help. There's usually people that help us get in places, but there's not usually somebody like helping us like actually get it done. And so it sat for a really long time, and ultimately I think, you know, with all the different processes and like the mixing and the mastering and trying to kind of figure out those were a learning process for us with that album, for sure, because we were actually working with some real industry people on that one. And then after it was all said and done, you know, we really tried to shop it and find some kind of label deal for it to back it before we released it. And ultimately just did a really poor job and didn't know what we were doing. And so just sat on it for way too long. And then we're growing as a band, and we're like, okay, this thing feels old now. What the heck are we going to do? And I reached out to the Fox and got us that, like, it was our show at the Fox, basically held the date last May, and we revolved everything around that. Ian and I did all the artwork. You know, Will did all of the online distribution and everything, got everything ready to go, and had a lot of friends who helped us get all that ready to go, and then, you know, independently released it.
Yeah, so you guys have been on like a lot of tours, it sounds like. Was that to do with the album? Did that happen after, or was that sort of a before?
No, we started touring really early on, when we were still like busking, basically. In our first year, like, we had started busking kind of like that April. I think this was like 2015 or 2016, you know, and we were busking, and then we had met another Denver band after we had finally like first started to play some of our shows, like electric shows. And both of us were like, you know, we need to start touring. And so we took my mom's minivan, and we played our first out-of-state show in Tucson, Arizona, to 3 people in a garage that was like 115 degrees. And I remember the guitar was just like a piece of noodle. It was like, and so that was kind of, that's still kind of what our tours have been like. But, you know, we just started booking these random shows across the country wherever we could. And so, you know, our first tour, I think Will was 15 or 16. And, we booked a show in Tucson, and then we booked a show in Vegas, and then we booked a show in Los Angeles, but it wasn't really Los Angeles, and they were kind of booked and kind of not booked. People would like reach out and be like, that would be fun, and then we just drove. Kind of were like driving to the shows like, hey, we're showing up, like, when can we play? And I remember we specifically booked the Vegas show like as we were like getting into Vegas. They were like, yeah, I think there's something going down like in Henderson, Nevada, and like, I guess you guys could drive out there and play the show. And then it was kind of the same thing. We played in LA. We like were in LA like looking around for shows to play, like kind of showing up to venues and being like, can we play? Like, and we ended up getting something in Lancaster, which was in the middle of buttfuck nowhere desert town, and played at this really strange bar in like a Mexican supermarket. So that was like our first tour, and like the tours after were kind of in the same vein. Just sitting down and trying to just reach out to whatever small place we could find and solidify something and make a list of them. And the tours after that, we've been up to through Seattle, Northwest, all the way down. And those were kind of our first ones, and those ones were all on tour with a band called Meeting House out of Denver. So we would there were 6 of us, 2 bands, all of our gear in a minivan. 3 people would be in the back, 1 person here, the whole drum set here, all the instruments over all of us, and then 2 people in the front seat. And it was just like 18 days of like, okay, like it's like you're carrying a van that's like worth $5,000 to drive to a show that you're actually not supposed to play because you're not 21, and you'd show up and they'd be like, yeah, you can't really play the show because it's like, okay, we just drove 1,000 miles to be here, and we just have nowhere to sleep. It was so much fun and so chaotic and like so ridiculous for so long. And those tours are like some of my like favorite things that I've ever done because they were just so unbelievable, and the connections that we've made on those tours still utilized today.
That's awesome. Do you have like a favorite venue from anywhere you've played?
Oh gosh, yeah. We played in San Francisco on the 4th of July a few years back, and it was, God, what was it called? It's not the Britisher. Is it the Britisher? I think it's the Britisher. No, I think that's in Lancaster. What the hell is it called? Okay, then I won't say that one. I'll say Le Voyeur in Olympia, Washington. Oh my God, it was so cool. There were 2 other bands from Colorado who were touring through Oregon at that time, and I had booked both that show at Le Voyeur. I think Aaron actually booked that show. He's the owner of 7 Circle. He booked that one, and then I had booked a show in Portland. And it was like basically 4 Denver bands with no Oregon following at all. And we got these shows and like both the promoters from both venues were like, what the fuck? Like, do you guys have any following at all? You have like a 4-band lineup and nobody's going to show up. So both those shows we played to each other. Like the bands just played to each other, but the venues were awesome. So those are some good venues up there. I like the Pacific Northwest area. It's fun.
Yeah, that's very fun. I can't imagine the promoters.
Oh my God, yeah.
Sort of, I guess, switching gears, could you talk about like the musical influences that you've had through your life, and then also like what you guys use in the Beeves?
Definitely. Personally, I think we all have a pretty wide range of influences, all 3 of us, in our own ways, but all kind of like converge when we are playing together. Personally, a lot of it depends on when you're asking is the thing. I think that if I'm thinking about, songwriting specific, Mountain Goats have always been a big one for me. If you're talking about, variety and like being unapologetic and like vulnerability, like true vulnerability, Tom Waits is a big one. And then if you're thinking about, performance and, like sound, I think Replacements has always been a big one. And so those are like three biggies. And then I know Velvet Underground for all of us has been really big, as many bands have also been very influenced from them as well. So I think for the Beeves, a lot of them are like the most like unapologetic bands. And I think like modern current bands that are playing like Parquet Courts have always been like a really big one too. So, and I think that one's for sure. So
With that, how do you guys like? What's the kind of process for making one of your guys' songs and writing it? If you know, with your specific influences, and then the rest of your bands, like if you guys all have different influences, how do you kind of mesh that into making like a Beeves original song? Like how do you make that sound your own? And like what goes into that? What's the process behind writing those?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just not thinking at all, and also not really knowing what we're doing as musicians, which is, I think, kind of been a lot of our success has come out of the lack of knowing, or just like how unprepared we are half the time, and that it like kind of just happens, which is like a shitty thing to say, but it's somewhat true. Where, you know, Ian and I will sit down, you know, when we were first starting out, it was just like, you know, Ian and I would get in a room and we just kind of jam together and then write bullshit lyrics, and then that was kind of a song, and then we would play it. And as the years have gone by, you know, it's a really collaborative process. Will is really great at, you know, actually understanding the structure of the songs. Ian is just so wild in the way that he plays, and that he just kind of strikes gold by accident a lot of the time, and then keeps mining that area. And, you know, for me, I think it just really depends. I think it's a lot being, you know, kind of moving into the bass role of this project. A lot of it is really understanding, you know, the full complexion of what's going on and trying to support that, and also trying to lead at the same time. But then being a songwriter as well, it adds a lot too, because the songs that I play bass on and that we play live a lot are very different than the songs that I write personally and that I write for the Beeves too, you know, and all of the albums kind of reflect that too. I usually have more of the softer songs on the records from what it has appeared at this point, but I would ultimately say that it's a highly collaborative process, and that each member contributes equally to the songwriting process. I don't think one person can take more than the other, and that's part of the magic of the group, actually. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a good mindset to have with putting stuff together.
And really listening to each other, and valuing everybody's input, you know.
Probably a pretty good transition to this song, Mercy Be. We've heard it is your baby specifically.
Yes, that one was definitely. It's funny because that song was actually kind of like something Ian and we've been playing that riff for a really long time. It's kind of like got the plunky bass, and then Ian plays that kind of spooky guitar line. And that was something like we've just messed with for years, just that little melody. Even when we were like, I still remember when we were recording Adam and Beeve, I remember like sitting on the floor in the basement and we were playing that, and like Tyler walked in and he was like, yeah, you can't do that. Like, we're not going to put that on the record.
You said bet.
Well, yeah, and then when we were getting ready to go for this next record that Mercy Be is on, we had kind of posted up and kind of like, we're like, okay, what do we have here? What are songs that we've worked on through, you know, these couple years that we still might want to touch on, and just started kind of refiguring those. And that was one that I personally was like always really about doing something with, but did not expect what we got on that record at all. And I think the whole process of the recording of that one was just so unlike anything I was expecting. You know, Will really started to feel it out when we were in the studio with the plunkiness, Ian doing that. It turned into something so much different than I was expecting, and was really, really, really happy about. And it was pretty magical doing that one, so...
And so that's on a record that's coming out soon. So did you guys record a while ago? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no. It's a bit confusing for me too, with all the COVID stuff that happened too, and my timeline is a bit skewed. We recorded that record. We were actually in the studio a year ago to the day. So we recorded that one last November in Chicago. And that was a really big opportunity for us because we did it at a studio called Electrical Audio in Chicago, which is where Steve Albini, who did, you know, Nirvana records, Pixie records, kind of like was behind the board of the whole grunge wave, was literally there. He did In Utero. He's done all sorts of crazy shit. And so we got the opportunity to go into Electrical Audio and record there for a week. Same kind of thing as Adam and Beeve. We were totally unprepared. We posted up like 3 weeks, I think, before we actually went into the studio. We're like, okay, these are like 6 songs we have kind of together. And it was like the first time we'd actually recorded in a real studio. Everything prior to that had been, or previous to that, had been in basements. And so we're in the comfort of like our own home and everything. So it was like actually like the pilgrimage to Chicago to record in this legendary studio was like really fucking daunting. And we still didn't know what we were doing. And we only had a few songs. I mean, like I would say we were least prepared for that record, for this coming record. I mean, we kind of had an idea, but there was actually a lot more writing on this one and a lot more pressure. We were spending a lot of money. We were in this like world famous studio. Like there were a lot of industry people around, and it was like, okay, we can't fuck up on this one. We really can't fuck up on this one. And so we got in on day 1, and we had played like 2 back-to-back sets, one in Lincoln, and then one in Omaha, and then drove all night long after our set in Omaha, like all night long, and we started recording at 8 a.m. We got in Chicago at 7, got a Dunkin' Donuts, and started the record. And, oh my god, and I just like still remember like kind of playing those first few tracks, and like Nate was on the monitor. He was like, what the fuck are you guys doing? He was like, are you guys ready to go at all? And we're like, yeah, sure. I think so. Like, but it was, again, really, really, really magical. You know, I think that we all allowed ourselves to just create. And I think with that kind of pressure and throwing yourself in that kind of box and using the tools that are with you without having time to think beforehand and crawling into that box, you're forced to like really, really self-search. And use each other as resources, because it's essential to actually creating it. And so this record is my favorite thing that we've done so far, and I think is the most collaborative as well, because I think Will especially shined on this record. He kind of got me out of the drum set and, you know, played a few songs. He's really been getting into some songwriting stuff, and he's really, really, really wonderful. And he's a wonderful, wonderful musician, and it was time for him to kind of like, you know, really be there. And I think he had to be there because we weren't ready as much as we could have been. And I'm really glad that we weren't, because it really forced him to be more a part of it. He kind of got behind, out of the drum set, basically. Yep. So he was very collaborative. You know, Ian brought a lot to the album too. I would say that we each kind of contributed, you know, 3 songs to the record. I mean, it's 10 songs, but I would say that like there were kind of specific things where one of us would really bring something, and then we would all work on it together. So I'm happy with that record. So but with COVID and everything, it's kind of thrown a pretty big wrench into everything. So it was supposed to be coming out like now at the latest, was the plan, because this process was a lot faster than Adam and Beeve, because we had the resources and we had the connections, and, you know, there was actually a lot more talk of labels before we even went in to it. And then, you know, just in the studio, you know, Bloodshot Records was like there when we were doing it. We played for them, went into the shop. You know, there was a lot like, okay, things are moving. We'll get this thing mastered. We'll get it out. We've had a lot of help from the Bohemian Foundation and the Music District up in Fort Collins. A lot of really supportive people up there that were helping us like push it and be like, yeah, it's time to get, you know, you guys backed with somebody and some kind of label help, because it's just so goddamn expensive. And then COVID happened, and now we're not really sure.
Yeah.
So I think like we released 1 song off of this about a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, and then this one was just kind of like, we need to keep activity going on this, and so that's that. But I'm not really sure what the projection of it looks like or when the release will be, so yet to be determined.
Well, this is just like such a beautiful song, and it makes me want to like walk into a sunset and like never return. But can you speak to a little bit about like what your inspiration was and like the story you're trying to tell with this song?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because because we had that lick for a while, and Ian and I had been kind of messing around with it. It was really more the fact that Ian was working on another song that night before we were going in for vocals. We didn't have any lyrics for the song. We had the song like done instrumentally, so we do all our instrumentals first and then we do the vocals on the last days, is how we've always tracked. And so like I believe that the whole instrumentation of the track was done, and we didn't have the vocals for it, or we had kind of the chorus of it, but we didn't have the melody for it. And I'd been kind of figuring out something when we were in the studio, and on one of the nights Ian was working on one of the other songs, and I just like was like, I'm just gonna write the lyrics for this right now and get this thing ready to go for tomorrow because we don't have time. And so I sat on the steps of the studio, and like we had free range of the place, and we were living in the studio too, so we were all in the studio for the entire time. So we'd all just be in different parts of the studio, and it was like this massive place where you could be in, you know, the A room where there's pianos and guitars and free range. You know, Kurt Cobain's guitar, it was there too, just like on the rack, and you could just play it. Damn. You know, late at night, just like a wall of pedals. It was just like the most like fucking crazy surreal thing ever. And so just like being surrounded by all of that, and just like being in this room where you're like, oh my God, this is like where Dave Grohl has tracked his drums, and like really crazy to just like sit there and kind of soak all that in. And so I just sat there and wrote that track out. And I had used like part of a poem that I had written prior to going in the studio. And I remember I like took a walk around my neighborhood and had started to kind of jot something down. And then I just elaborated off of that. And then Ian wrote the chorus parts, like Take Mercy Be, or whatever. That part we had done prior to going in the studio. Now I'm remembering. Yes. Okay. That part was written when we went in the studio, because we had kind of formulated that before we went in. And so the chorus was there, and we knew we were going to do that, but we didn't have like a melody or lyrics for it. And so so that kind of happened. And then the next day went in the studio, and I'd been kind of chain smoking the whole time we had been there, because you could smoke inside. I think we all were, and we were all just like stressed. And so it's just like, oh my God, I'm breathing more cigarette than I am oxygen. Is horrible. And so my voice was just getting more and more like a trash can throughout the whole time. And when we were recording that one and I was doing the vocals for it, I had like kind of dropped my register, and I sang it in a lower register than I would ever do. Ever. And just like laid it out that way, and it was like, you just have to do it this way, like it has to be low. And so I kind of sang it like a 60-year-old man, like who was like out on the dusty trail. And then it ended up being how it was all together. And so I was feeling really, honestly, somewhat self-conscious about that vocal part for a long time. I mean, I still feel somewhat strange about it, because it's like when we play a performance, I definitely don't emulate that voice. And so, you know, even listening to it too, it's been interesting to see the kind of reception on it and be like, no, that's me singing it. Like, so it's a definitely an interesting track. There's a lot going on in it.
That's kind of another question, since we went a little bit into the song. I know we just saw the music video like right now, but if you want to talk a bit, I don't know how much of a role you played in making the music video, but I thought that was an awesome video. And so I'd love to just kind of hear more about the process behind it, the kind of how you went from the recorded song to the video and like came up with the visuals and whatnot.
Yeah, that was another kind of spur of the moment thing that was done in one night, the whole thing you saw. And we had, Fort Collins does this thing called FOCO MX in April every year, and it's like this pretty big festival where they invite a bunch of big acts, and they invite like the locals to all share kind of the stage together. You know, 2 years ago Blondie was there. Like they always have, just Fort Collins is truly one of the most supportive music scenes I have ever seen in my ever like anywhere. And so they had this thing where when you apply to the festival, you can also apply for this competition. It's not really a competition. It's like an opportunity to record a free music video it's presented by the Bohemian Foundation, which is a nonprofit out of Fort Collins, which is why it's such a supported music scene. There's a lot of money that goes into the community that's actually like all supported and all nonprofit money. So they allot a lot of money to creating that creative environment and city. It's a really beautiful thing. And so I had filled out that little form and was like, yeah, sure, we'll apply for this free music video thing and we'll see if we get it, whatever. And so we got the offer. It was like, we got into the festival along with being like, hey, you also got this opportunity to record a free music video before the festival. And then they like premiere all the videos at the festival free of charge. You don't have to do anything and you can just kind of pick a song. So festival was canceled because of COVID and everything. Everything was postponed, including this like video shoot and everything. And so in August, we got a message and they were like, hey, I think we're going to try to do this music video shoot. And that was from Colorado Sound. And they were like, hey, we're going to try to do this. And we're going to just pair you up with some random production company. And so we got paired up with a group called Nerd Rat Media. That's like mostly done by like, I think there was like a crew of like 6 or something run by like 2 main guys. And we met them over Zoom the Friday before we started recording. We met them on Friday, and we started recording Saturday night with no plan. And so because the whole thing 53 or 50, the actual name of the competition, it's like 5380 or something like that, or about 5370, where it's like you have to do it in this like short amount of time, and that's kind of the whole thing. They've put you up with a crew, they support you, but you have to do it in this like little period of time. And so we didn't have very much time. We met them, we told them our idea. They said that they had some barn out in Fort Collins that they could kind of figure out. They liked the song, kind of created an idea for it. We kind of collabed a little bit. They had a few actors come out, showed up to the space. We started filming around like 9 at night, and then we went until like 3 in the morning. And we brought all of our Western gear, and like I brought my tape machine, and the whole video is filmed in one shot. So we did it half time. Actually, that's why it like appears that it's all slow motion and everything. Well, it was double time when we were recording. So it's like boom, like it sounded like Alvin and the Chipmunks was going basically as it's recording, because like they're recording on one fluid shot. If you guys are familiar with like Birdman and everything, a continuous shot the whole time, where she pressed the tape recorder and like this fast version of Mercy B is playing, and she's like dancing through this whole thing, and then we're all kind of moving from this shot to the next shot to the next shot. So there's no splicing in the actual shot itself, because we didn't have a lot of time and everything. So we're like, we'll just do this in one shot. And so then they sped it up in the actual pre-production to the normal speed, so everything is slow motion and kind of flowy and dream-like. So a lot of that goes, I would say most of like the creative input on that one goes to Nerd Rat Media. We were kind of secondhand on that. It was, they were kind of calling the shots, and we were like, yes, no, or kind of things like that. So they were awesome. Big shout out to them. Yeah,
like hearing the song and then watching the video, I was like, oh, that's perfect. Like that couldn't be better. Just absolutely beautifully done. You've talked about this in a couple different ways, but can you maybe elaborate on like what your experience has been with making music during the pandemic, or if you've been able to make music for the last however long?
Yeah, it's oh my gosh. I think I've used this analogy for other things, but I kind of feel like silly putty a little bit. Silly putty never really breaks. It's just kind of like you can pull it and pull it and pull it, and then it's just kind of like a little string down there. Like I feel like this pandemic has kind of been like silly putty, where we kind of start out and it starts getting pulled, and then we like create something else, and then it kind of starts getting pulled, and then we create something else, and the string never really breaks. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
beautiful analogy.
And so I think in the beginning of the pandemic, we were really optimistic. We're like, we're going to make the best of this. We've got a record coming out. We've got a lot of big things moving. And so we spent a lot of time on like our live streams and like did some like actual recordings during quarantine that we were like pretty serious about and we're working really hard on. But as the summer like progressed, it became just like a little more difficult, and the pandemic just seemed to just drag and a little more scary, I think, too, for everybody. And it felt just a little irresponsible to be really trying to push performances, in my opinion, too. I was like, I don't want to play anything inside. I'm not going to confirm any shows that are inside or that seem loosey-goosey at all. And like we were getting offers from venues, and they were like, hey, like we have socially distanced shows, like we want you in here. And I was like, no. And I think that we all kind of were under that understanding. So we did get to play through the summer more than a lot of groups did. We played a drive-in show where everybody pulled up with their cars. We played the Cars, which was really interesting. And then we played at Mishawaka up in Fort Collins 2 times this summer, which was really amazing because it's an outdoor venue on the river up there, and they had all of these tables set out, and it was really beautifully done. So we actually got an opportunity to perform this summer and really play some music that like felt like live music, even though people were sitting at tables. And I think at this point, I don't think that we're really discouraged, but I think that it's really difficult to pour a lot of energy into something that right now doesn't seem as significant to everything else going on outside of music and everything going on outside of, our own little bubble. I think that definitely with everything pre-election, a lot of the focus needed to be on a lot of the movements going on and on focusing that attention towards the election and everything. It's just, I think we were all kind of feeling that too. There are not a lot of people playing, and it felt somewhat irresponsible to be playing, especially as it gets colder too, because a lot of things are inside and everybody's kind of figuring it out. And I think it's difficult too because there's so many moving parts, but it doesn't really feel like a live performance when there's only a couple people there. It's just like losing some of its integrity, but it's also still important to maintain it. So I think a lot of people have not really struck that balance yet because everybody's so unsure. But I think that it is important to you still have to, you don't want to just not exist through all of this. But I think that it's also being like, let me be sensitive to what's going around outside and making sure that we're doing our part, but also still providing some kind of reprieve for people. So we have a show this weekend, also presented by Mishawaka, but it's inside of a bowling alley. And like I'm a little nervous about it because I don't want a lot of people to show up, but I obviously do want people to show up. And I know that they work really well with social distancing measures, so this will be the first show we've had inside in a long time. And with it being as bad as it is, it's like, yeah, that's a risk. What the hell are we supposed to do? We haven't played a show in 3 months, and people want it, and like saying you're doing everything right. So it's like, I think for me personally, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if there was like one person at the show who had it and it like created some kind of pocket, and it was our show, so I would feel really responsible for that. So this weekend, I think it's going to be like hyper vigilant and understanding things, and if things feel uncomfortable, it's like, okay, then we need to communicate this and see what we can do to make sure that it's all okay. So we'll see. It's
a very tricky position.
It is. It's really tricky too, because like all I want to do is be playing, and all I want to do is be continuing to do this. But I think that the main thing, personally for me, it's been trying to find other ways to alleviate that kind of like restlessness, and fueling energy into like other artistic endeavors and different things that I can do that don't relate to this or this project.
It's definitely hard to balance that. I think that kind of at the end of the questions we had prepared here, but just if there's at the end any self promo you want to do, like what's next for the Beeves, anything you want to, the camera turned off. We can finish up without a camera, that's all right. Anything you want to kind of finish up with, like what are you guys planning? I know the album is kind of like up in the air with when it might come out, but what's next for you all?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what everything's going to look like with COVID, and like I said, I want to be I just want to be sensitive to the pandemic and not try to preemptively push something or book a show in like May, for example, and be like, this is going to be our release show, and then COVID's still in full swing, and we have to cancel it and have to deal with all of that. But at the same time, it's like you don't want to just keep waiting and waiting and waiting and then never have the album come out because COVID is still going on. And so I don't think that we've really figured out what we're going to do with that yet. I think that at this point we're going to continue to release singles to get people just something and just like keep throwing things out there instead of just like releasing the full thing. So I think we'll probably release one more single after this, probably in January or something like that, and keep kind of pushing those and keeping excitement and keeping people like engaged. But I think we'll just see. We got another offer to do our third record, and this time in Spain.
Ooh.
So it's I'm not sure how that's all going to be, but that's supposed to be in July.
Wow.
And it's like, well, if COVID's going to happen, then we have no idea how that's going to be. So who knows? So I'm not really banking on it, but it's out in the world, and that's kind of the excitement where it's like, okay, next summer could be really cool if COVID's not going on, or if it is going on, maybe we just do an album, and we haven't even released the other one yet, and so we'll have 2 albums. So like, oh gosh, so not really sure.
Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been awesome. We're so excited for everything you have coming out. It's going to be very exciting, very cool.
Thank you for listening to Crave the Podcast. Crave the Podcast is produced by myself, Jake Trujillo, Zac Clement, and Kalyan Lemercier. Make sure to follow Crave the Sound on Instagram and subscribe wherever you like to listen. You can also check out our YouTube channel for weekly episodes. See you next week!